Hello, everybody. My name is Patty Edelberg. I'm the Vice President of the National Farmers Union and a dairy farmer from Wisconsin. I'm here to welcome you all to NFU's Climate Change Days of Advocacy. This event wraps up a week of meetings between members of NFU's Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel and staff from key members of Congress from their offices. Farmers Union members made the case that we are being affected by climate change and need federal support as we work to adapt to climate change. Over and over again in these meetings, Congressional staff have been receptive and are interested in the idea. We really need to send a big thank you to all the panel members for their hard work in helping and advancing these important issues. After all, Farmers Union has been a long champion for climate change policy. Family farmers and ranchers are at the forefront of the effects of climate change and are ready to help by making our land more resilient and by sequestering carbon. National Farmers Union policy calls for voluntary, incentive-based programs and market initiatives to help us with the work that we need to help to get the work done, including upfront costs and technical assistance. This will help us to improve soil health and jumpstart renewable energy and biofuels production. The work we do as farmers is for the public good, and the government must partner with us to help us address climate change. Now is a good time to be talking to lawmakers and USDA about climate change. 2021 started with a winter storm across the center of the country that cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of damage to agriculture. Texas on its own suffered losses that will total around $600 million. Now we're seeing severe drought across the West, and wildfire season is already in full front in California, which is far ahead of where it was last year at this time. And it could become one of the worst wildfire seasons in history. Hurricane watchers are predicting another above average season for storms, even as many communities are along the Gulf Coast are still working to rebuild from last year. In fact, just the other day, they named the first hurricane of the season. While these weather events generate headlines, family farmers are seeing the effects of climate change in ways both big and small. Increasing volatility is what hurts us the most. It's taking the winds that used to blow just in the spring, but they're present year round now, taking off the topsoil. It's the temperatures in winter that don't get low enough or long enough to kill off pests. It's the late season frosts that are harming fruit and vegetable production. It's the rain that either comes too often, at the wrong time, or in many cases not at all. Congress and the federal government are taking notice. Just last month, the Senate Aid Committee signed off on the Growing Climate Solutions Act. NFU supports this bipartisan legislation, and the bill would provide information and some certainty for farmers as they are considering taking part in carbon markets. In the House, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree reintroduced the Agriculture Resilience Act, a bill that would strengthen USDA programs to help better address climate issues. Lawmakers are being urged to better fund USDA's conservation technical assistance and the Grazing Land Conservation Initiative, which will help to provide another way for some farmers and ranchers to get the support they need to help tackle climate change on their own land. USDA is also looking at this issue and how it can assist farmers and ranchers now. Secretary Vilsack has prioritized climate change in the department's activities and has floated ideas like a carbon bank to help fund carbon sequestration efforts. The Secretary has prioritized climate change. He's also requested input from farm groups and others on what action that we should be taking. And Farmers Union, of course, is always pleased to see this necessary work by USDA. And of course, we have some suggestions and for how to make it move forward smoothly. First off, keep farmers and ranchers in mind and put them first. They must be partners in how we tackle climate change. Second, ensure USDA has the staff, training, and science-based information on how to build soil health and climate resiliency on all types of land and operations. There must be tools and assistance available for all farmers and for all ranchers. Third, recognize the public good from all the ecosystem services that farmers and ranchers can provide on the land. Addressing climate change is much more than just carbon sequestration. And finally, the government must act fast. There really is no time to waste when it comes to climate change. With all that in mind, in just a minute, we'll hear from USDA to tell us more about the next steps in addressing climate change. And to help guide that discussion with our USDA and our panelists, I will turn it over to National Farmers Union's Vice President of Advocacy and fellow Wisconsinite, Mike Strands.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Patty. Thanks for joining in on today's conversation. This is a good opportunity to follow up on the work that so many Farmers Union members have been doing this week and last week during our Climate Change Days of Advocacy with outreach to Congress and Capitol Hill. And today we'll, as Patty said, hear from USDA about some of the priorities the Biden administration is putting into place. So with that, we'll now hear from Vidisha Bhattacharya. She's a senior policy advisor at USDA's Farm Service Agency and is working very hard on issues related to climate change. Vidisha joined USDA in February from the Center for American Progress, where she served as a director for climate and energy policy. She's also spent time at the impact investment firm Village Capital and has worked to build solar energy infrastructure in rural India. Vidisha also spent 4 years on Capitol Hill working on energy and agriculture for members of the Minnesota Congressional delegation. She holds a master's degree from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree from St. Olaf College. Before she begins the presentation, on your Zoom panels, I'll direct your attention to the Q&A function. Please feel free to add any questions you might have, and we'll work through those once the beginning parts of the presentation have concluded. So be sure to use the Q&A button for that. If you have any technical questions or technical issues, put those in the chat, and NFU staff will help you out. So again, please help me welcome Vidisha Bhattacharya. Vidisha.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Patty. It's so nice to be here with you all. I actually grew up in Wisconsin myself, and but I'm also from southern Minnesota. I went to high school, so I kind of claim both states. But really nice to be with all of you here today, talking about a really exciting topic. And I know that NFU has been thinking about these things for years, and your members have been champions of a lot of practices and types of ideas that we've been throwing around now. So really thank you so much for having me. So as Mike mentioned, I'm a senior policy advisor here at USDA. I sit within the Farm Service Agency, but I kind of float around and work on climate and conservation issues kind of across the department, as well as some of the interagency efforts that are going on around both climate and conservation. So, it's been a really nice, interesting, and fun ride. But I want to thank the National Farmers Union. You've always been great partners on these issues. Obviously I joined the USDA recently, but I've been working on these issues for years, and NFU's always been just a fantastic partner to work with. So I'll just speak for a little bit, and then mostly want to hear from all of you. But as you know, the Biden administration and Secretary Vilsack are very focused on climate change and putting agriculture and forestry at the heart of the administration's climate efforts. The executive order that the president put out at the very beginning directed USDA to think about climate smart agriculture and forestry and how we can use our existing tools as well as new ideas to tackle climate change. And so we wanted to open that up to hear from a variety of different folks. So hence the Federal Register notice that went out recently, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But climate change, we see this as a huge opportunity for agriculture, for farmers, a market opportunity and a jobs opportunity. So kind of across the board. And that's really the approach and the mindset that we're going at this with. But farmers and ranchers, those making their living from the land, firsthand, you're on the front lines of kind of experiencing both the impacts of climate change, and it's a critical sector that has to be part of the solution and can play a critical role in addressing the problem. So this is both a major challenge, but also a major opportunity. So at USDA, we're looking at opportunities to encourage the voluntary adoption of climate smart ag and forestry practices that both reduce emissions, sequester carbon, and help get the industry to net zero. And all of this is, with the lens of how to make this work for producers and, those on the front lines managing the land. And if it's not going to work for producers, it's just not going to work. And so that's kind of the refrain that we've been keeping in our minds over and over again. So in March, we put out a notice in response to the president's executive order calling for all of your ideas and all of your thoughts, and very, very grateful to National Farmers Union for participating both in listening sessions and giving us written comments. We've received thousands of comments, but I actually have the NFU comments right here, and I've read through them. So really, really nice to read those. And as I read them, and also as I listened during the sessions, you know, we have a lot of common ground here and shared priorities. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to work together going forward. You talk about making climate change a priority across programs, focusing on technical assistance and training, you know, both focusing on science-based tools, markets, rewarding early adopters, and making sure that programs benefit all farmers, including socially disadvantaged farmers, BIPOC farmers, et cetera. And that's, you know, those are along the lines of exactly kind of A, what we've been hearing across the board from a lot of different folks, and B, kind of where the secretary and the administration is moving towards. So I'm really glad to see those in your comments. You know, USDA's approach is not going to be, we're just at the beginning of the process of listening and kind of cultivating some ideas, but there's not going to be a one-shot approach here, just as your helpful comments lay out. This has to be multi-pronged. So we're going to look at conservation incentives for farmers and ranchers and foresters through existing programs, thinking about new ideas, thinking about new and emerging markets for carbon benefits generated by the ag sector. We're going to, you know, make sure there's a strong focus on research and development, outreach, technical assistance, and education. So there's a lot of different components of this strategy that are going to have to be a part of it in order to make it work. You know, in parallel, we're looking at ways to strengthen in domestic and international markets for commodities that are produced in climate-friendly ways. But, you know, we have to make sure that farmers and ranchers benefit from those opportunities, those market opportunities. And so that's, you know, that's another, not another, but that's like part of the equation on kind of what we're thinking about. And I know there's a lot of interest in this carbon bank idea, and, you know, we are examining all of the authorities that we currently have and options that we have. Many of you know the Commodity Credit Corporation was set up to strengthen and support agricultural markets and to spur new markets for agricultural goods and services. So USDA is looking at our ability to leverage this authority and what we can do to allow farmers, ranchers, and rural landowners to take advantage of new markets and opportunities. And so that's something that we're kind of looking at a lot of different angles and hearing from a lot of different folks on ideas. So looking forward to talking more about your ideas. And through all of this, equity is a guiding principle. We're paying special attention to make sure that socially disadvantaged farmers, small producers, beginning farmers, ranchers, and early adopters who've paved the way for a long time on a lot of these practices are, you know, are benefiting from these programs and or solutions, whatever they end up being. So the Federal Register notice just closed a couple weeks ago, and, you know, so we'll be putting out a public report in the coming weeks that kind of lays out what we heard initially and kind of next steps. But that's just a start. And obviously we've received so many comments, so we'll be continuing to wade through those and have follow-up conversations and stakeholder engagement and outreach as we develop and implement our strategy. So that's, you know, on the climate smart ag and forestry front. And I wanted to just quickly touch on a couple other things, and then we can go to your questions. But I wanted to flag that we did recently, you know, we're doing what we can now too, and we're listening, and we're also kind of moving forward with the things that the tools that we have at our disposal now and targeting those better toward climate. So we recently announced kind of like a expansion and reboot and revamp of the Conservation Reserve Program. This is one of the world's largest voluntary conservation programs, and it's, you know, it's a pretty incredible opportunity. But right now the program has been grossly under enrolled. You know, we're under by about 4 million acres, and so it's a lot of you know, opportunity left on the table for producers and for the environmental benefits that the program brings. So we've expanded and renewed CRP with a new climate incentive, among other things, higher payment rates, and a variety of other changes. And the goal is to boost enrollment, get to the acreage cap, and target the program more toward climate smart practices. And as a part of that, you mentioned the importance of technical assistance. We're boosting technical assistance that NRCS agents provide as part of that program to be able to help producers plan and implement their conservation plans. And the other piece of this is we're using this as an opportunity to kind of lay the groundwork, no pun intended, for kind of monitoring and measurement of the carbon sequestration and other climate related benefits of these practices that are part of CRP that we're kind of putting into the climate incentives. So we'll be rolling out kind of a science-driven monitoring verification initiative here in partnership with research partners and others across the country. So that's another pretty exciting opportunity that's very, very much happening right now. And finally, the president's budget also makes a lot of this a priority. It's going to invest in climate resilience and disaster planning, partnering with rural America to grow economies through clean energy, addressing, the growing threat from wildfire, bolstering climate research and development, and emphasizing voluntary land, public and private land conservation. And then finally, the American Jobs Plan also makes all of this a priority to kind of move the American agriculture sector toward net zero. So there's a lot happening, a lot of moving parts here, and so we're excited and looking forward to working together with all of you. So I will stop there and excited to kind of hear your thoughts and questions. So Mike, I'll turn it back to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Badisha. Let's see, there have been a few questions coming in, and I encourage everyone to submit some using the Q&A box down below. But I'll look over at a couple of the questions that have come in thus far. One of the things that was raised was some of the extreme weather that we've seen in the West, particularly the Mountain West with drought, and how Southwest Colorado in particular needs assistance, particularly related to drought. Different crops have different sorts of coverages through crop insurance, and a lot of that is part of the crop insurance contract. But USDA, of course, plays a big role in setting guidelines and the framework for how crops are insured or have eligibility through disaster programs or traditional Title I Farm Bill programs. Are there ways that USDA is considering adding some of this increased volatility into how crops are covered and protected as we face the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I think that is absolutely in the kind of like suite of toolkit options that we're looking at. I think, all of this is about risk and risk management for producers. And so obviously existing programs, crop insurance, et cetera, as well as other, what are other ways that we can leverage our existing programs and authorities to help farmers manage risk, I think is absolutely a lens that we very much welcome your ideas on kind of where we should be looking across all of the USDA toolkit. A couple other things on drought specifically that I'll say is, the USDA and Interior have been in the past coordinated on a drought resilience task force, the NDRP, National Drought Resilience Partnership. And so I know there's an interagency process right now on thinking about how to revitalize that and like really hone in on these drought issues and not just leverage the toolkit at USDA, which is extensive, but also think about where other resources across agencies that we should be, kind of targeting and coordinating and honing in on some of these things. So, but that's an area that is going to continue to be a huge, huge priority. This is where we're seeing climate impacts today. This is no longer an abstract thing in the future. So very much welcome comments and thoughts and ideas on how we should be thinking about it.
Yeah, it's really fascinating and, well, also alarming to see how seriously a lot of actors are taking climate change right now, not in a abstract someday scenario, but right now. And it's the work that USDA is doing to build that into the risk models that go into crop insurance and farm programs is important, but we see it elsewhere We've heard from it elsewhere, from Commodities Futures Trading Commission to NOAA, of course, and places like that, that the change is happening, it has happened, and is going to continue to happen. So thanks for highlighting that. Another question that came in has to do with CRP, like you mentioned, and the under enrollment that's plagued CRP in recent years. And one of the issues that we've heard is that with the lack of access to land for some beginning farmers in particular, and coupled with short-term rental contracts that can hinder a farmer's ability to invest in their soil health. In other words, it's hard to think long-term when you're struggling to get in the first place. What has the department been doing to address this kind of concern? And is there more information that you might need to help out with that?
Yeah, so I've heard, we've heard that concern, and I know our conservation division and FSA is very much aware of that, the kind of balance between, where the access to land issue and then getting the lands that should be in CRP into CRP. And I think one key piece of this is getting the right lands into CRP, right? Like, so we're not talking about whole fields. CRP is really focused on marginal lands and lands that are quite environmentally sensitive. And so one piece of this is going to be to really, the program already does that, but continuing to make sure that there is the right types of lands going into the program. And part of that is also empowering farmers themselves to kind of help define which acres that they are. So for parts of the program, so there's different elements of CRP. So I'm happy to follow up with more specifics on kind of like where the conservation division team has been thinking about addressing those questions on targeting, and also kind of like some of the other changes that will make it easier for producers to participate, because I know it's kind of pieces of the program are frankly cumbersome and clunky. And so that's another thing we've been thinking about in terms of how to make it simpler to participate. And technical assistance is a big piece of this. So the ramp up of TA is kind of one of the pieces that we're hoping will help solve some of the enrollment issues. But the question around making sure there's access to land, I think it really is about targeting the right acres and making sure the acres that are coming in are the right ones and not the wrong ones. And so I think that's going to be a big piece of the solution there.
Certainly. Yeah, and the concerns about technical assistance, I mean, that comes up all the time when we're working amongst our members with the Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel. In fact, that was one of the top asks in our congressional meetings, was to make sure funding's available there. And I guess one of the questions, not only you've talked about what USDA is doing to address that concern, but if there were more resources available, what would some of the biggest priorities be, do you think, for USDA to expand technical assistance availability? What would that look like, or do you have any sense how that might play out?
I think there's a lot of ways that could go. I think a lot of this is like making existing technical assistance better, but I think there's better and creative ways we can do it too. Also, and especially as you all think about ways to reach out to beginning farmers, minority farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers who aren't benefiting from these programs currently as much as they should be and can be. So a lot of this is like developing new types of partnerships with technical assistance partners, cooperative agreements, et cetera, that USDA can do so that we're getting, the TA out to folks through the channels that are going to reach them. And so I think that's where NFU and others can be really helpful in helping us think through, like, how can we make sure that like the dollars that are being put into technical assistance are going to the right partners to get and reach the farmers that we want to reach. But I think a key part of this will be kind of new and different and expanded partnerships with technical assistance providers to be able to do that.
Thanks. Yeah, that gives us a better sense of what it might look like and how that might come together. Speaking on the topic of things that might be, and hopefully will be, looking to the Growing Climate Solutions Act, another big piece of what we were talking about with congressional offices this week and have been working on for more than a year now, I suppose, in one way, shape, or form. Probably a lot longer than that, if you think about it long term. But the question came in, will USDA regulate the buying and selling of carbon credits? Is USDA looking to make a carbon credit clearinghouse where producers and companies can meet? I think this gets to the points about how Growing Climate Solutions sets up a framework and sets some ground rules. Can you comment on what USDA might be doing to prepare for that, or already could do or might do with legislative action like the Growing Climate Solutions Act?
Yeah, so I mean, the Growing Climate Solutions Act is kind of, one of a set of ideas out there on kind of how USDA can kind of help make carbon markets work and work better for producers. Right now there's a huge opportunity that I think agriculture is missing out on, because there's lack of clarity on rules of the road. There's lack of sort of like uniformity, et cetera. So there's a lot of different ways the department could go about this, and we have not chosen one, or there probably won't just be one big announcement that goes out the door. Again, this is probably going to be multi-pronged. We're going to try a few things. We're going to continue to take input and collect outreach. We are looking right now at our existing authorities and kind of what we could do currently without any legislative efforts or changes. But obviously, as Congress acts and gives USDA more tools, that will change the game, and that will change the ability for the department to do various things. But part of the outreach that's been part of the, this Climate Smart Ag and Forestry Federal Register notice has been around these questions. So we haven't, there isn't like a secret plan that we're gonna just like roll out the door with. Genuinely, there's not. I think we really are looking at all the across options, hearing from folks on what we should or should not do. And I think among the guiding principles is that this has to make producers have to benefit from these. If there's like, if there is some sort of involvement in environmental markets, what does that look like in a way that makes it easier for producers to participate, and that, economically benefits them. So it's not going to be a very satisfying answer I can give right now on specifics, because we don't have it like fully baked. And that's, I think it's something to roll out carefully to make sure it works for the folks that we're trying to benefit. But I will say there's a big opportunity out there. So I think that is absolutely an area that we are looking at closely, and welcome your ideas.
Certainly, yeah. And it is tough to look ahead to bills that might pass, but I think the preparation is probably.
I know you all are talking to your members, so I think make sure to continue to do that. So obviously there's a lot of activity on the Hill right now on these ideas. So.
Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Sure.
Okay, great. So one of the topics that we've seen a lot in news stories recently, and some of the announcements from USDA and other places, and with the work that NFU is doing with the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, centers around the carbon bank and efforts related to that. Have there been any recent updates on kind of scoping for that? I know with some of the discussions related to the comment period that closed a couple of weeks ago were sort of around this topic. Just curious if there was any feedback that came through that process you can speak to that might affect how the carbon bank set of programs or setup might be affected. Just any updates there, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of a carbon, you can ask different people on what that even means, and you will get different answers. So I think it actually relates to the previous question, right? Like, this is all kind of in the realm of how do we kind of reward and capture the value, the environmental value that producers create when they put into place specific practices that help sequester carbon. And so a carbon bank could look a lot of different ways, and we're evaluating all those options, and we're looking at what are ways that, what that could even mean, I guess is what I would say. And it ranges from, I think options that are quite hands-off and kind of just provide some level of clarity in the market all the way to like, you know, much more hands-on solutions. And again, we haven't taken a stance on any of these, nor will there necessarily be one thing that USDA tries, because this is going to take some iteration. So I think that we've got, and we're still like, as I said, we're going through a lot of the comments that we've gotten in the Federal Register notice on this exact question. It's one that's generated a lot of interest and a lot of opinions, a lot of like, well-founded, well-reasoned opinions. So we don't want to be hasty on this and get it wrong. And so I think there's, it's going to take some time to just sort of think through what are the different options, you know, and related to the Commodity Credit Corporation, how does those authorities relate? What can we do today? What might take congressional action, et cetera? So that I think those are, it's again, sort of in the same realm of not a very clear, satisfying answer I can give you now, other than to say like, we are going to be trying a bunch of interesting, exciting things. And, you know, it's going to be in partnership with folks like NFU and others to roll out kind of this whole suite of things that we're going to try.
Certainly. Let's see, I think I've got one last question here, and maybe we'll take a little time for a closing as well. But for one last question, last week, the administration announced the America the Beautiful initiative, which kind of springs forth, I think, from the Climate Executive Order of January 27th, which included the language on 30 by 30 and land conservation and land and water conservation goals, and just how that process is shaping up. Could you talk more about how that fits in with USDA's climate goals and conservation goals for that matter too, and how the department will be working on that? It'll help clear up, I think, a lot of the speculation, I guess, that surrounded 30 by 30 and the executive order.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'll start off by saying, as I think many of you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there on what this was and what this wasn't. So I hope that the kind of like the public facing document that was out there, put out there in the announcement last week helped clarify some of that, you know, but basically we're talking about an interagency process to kind of take a very flexible, locally led approach over 10 years to kind of roll out this America the Beautiful campaign to conserve and restore lands and waters. So obviously private working lands are a huge part of that. But it's, you know, I'm double bold underlining the voluntary efforts here. Partnerships are going to be a huge part of this with producers, with state and local governments, with nonprofits, et cetera, to figure out different ways that work in specific places. So locally led is a huge part of this, you know, making sure that this is all kind of a bottom-up approach. So the report, for those of you who had a chance to look at it, lays out kind of 8 core principles of the 30 by 30 effort, the America the Beautiful campaign. But, you know, it focuses on collaborative and inclusivity, you know, making sure that everyone benefits, like thinking, you know, having an equity lens, locally led, honoring tribal sovereignty, honoring private property rights, and voluntary stewardship and conservation. And that's where I think, and you know, I'm taking a science-based approach. So flexibility, adaptivity, I think adaptive approaches, all that is going to be part of this. I think where USDA will be involved is in, you know, obviously like there's a huge role for private lands to play here. So between the Forest Service and kind of all of the working lands voluntary programs that we have a lot of tools in our toolkit to be able to roll out different pieces of this. There's a big question obviously on kind of like the what counts, like what's in, what's out. And the way we've been thinking about it and encouraging others to think about it is it's a spectrum. Conservation is a continuum. There's going to be a lot of different types of things that will be part of this effort. And USDA is going to be coming, you know, together with the Department of Interior and Commerce specifically NOAA, because it's like this is lands and oceans we're talking about, to kind of think about this question on kind of what's our baseline right now and where are we at. We don't have good, perfect data at the federal level that's all in one place where you can just count. So there's some questions around where that, where are we today? And so I think that's where USDA is going to have a strong voice in making sure that the value of a lot of the conservation efforts that producers and private landowners have been doing for decades are part of the conversation. So there's, and in terms of your question about the link between the two, I mean, we see these as obviously they're related efforts, right? Like conservation, you can't just like silo climate over here. I mean, all of the conservation practices that farmers and ranchers implement have benefits across water quality, soil health. There's so many different resilience, wildlife habitat, endangered species, migratory corridors, all this stuff there. So it's hard to just like silo out one from the other. However, when we think about kind of the tools at our disposal, these are distinct efforts, at USDA to kind of think through specifically the climate benefits and the climate smart and climate resilience piece. We're not, these aren't like all just completely merging either. So I want to make that clear as well.
Yeah, that is helpful. And I think the group that did a lot of the congressional meetings this week, the Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel for NFU, obviously has a lot of work that they've done with conservation issues. And as further plans or further goals are solidified through the America the Beautiful initiative, always stand ready to help out and to offer up suggestions, recommendations, real world examples to help fill that in. Did you have any other closing remarks or anything like that?
Not super structured, other than to say thank you. And, again, just reiterating that NFU has been a fantastic partner all along. And I truly appreciate the engagement on these issues and some of the deep thought that many of you and your members have put in. So you will be hearing from us more, but please reach out directly anytime on any of these things. We're going to be kind of, there's going to be a drumbeat now kind of going forward on a lot of this as a lot of this kind of gets put on. We put more pen to paper on what this is going to look like and then start actually rolling things out the door. So we very much want to do this in partnership with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Khadisha. Appreciate the time. Thanks for your willingness to answer so many questions and to spend some time this afternoon or morning with us. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, as we move on with today's program, I'll next call upon Senior Government Relations Representative for NFU, Jenny Hopkinson, to introduce the Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel and a few of the participants in this week's meeting. So, Jenny,
thanks,
you're the first
Mike.
non-Wisconsinite to speak today. So
I didn't know if I should bring that up. I don't know. Anyway,
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, I'm Jenny Hopkinson. I'm not from Wisconsin, but I am the Senior Government Relations Representative for the National Farmers Union, and I run our climate programs here. And so as part of the Days of Advocacy, we have participated, the members of our NFU Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel have been engaging with members of Congress to talk about climate change, the effects on their land, what it looks like. This panel of NFU members helps to advise NFU on climate change policy issues and ensure a farmer voice is central to our work. Over the past week, these farmers and ranchers have met with members of the Senate Agriculture Committee and House Agriculture Committee leadership to share their experience and talk about what Congress should do. In particular, panel members have asked for support for the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which we've talked a lot about today, the Agricultural Resilience Act, and funding for USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, Technical Assistance, and Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative. So joining us now are three members of the panel. We have Hannah Fulmer from Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, Doug Mosel from California Farmers Union, and Adam Pimley of Montana Farmers Union, who are going to share their thoughts about the need for federal climate action, about this week's meetings, and kind of just talk about their experience and reflect on this week. And so with that, we'll start with Hannah, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everybody. I am from Wisconsin. I'm going to throw that in there. I grew up in Wisconsin in the Driftless region, but I am now in Colorado. As Jenny said, I'm with Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. I am the co-president of the Four Corners chapter down in Southwest Colorado. And then Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, for those who aren't aware, represents Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. So I'm in Durango. I run a diversified vegetable farm with my husband. We are small scale and 100% focused on building soil health. We're first generation farmers who came to this because we were quite concerned about climate change and we're big systems thinkers, and we're looking for kind of the high leverage point to really begin to impact this. And when we learned about soil health and its potential for carbon sequestration and water holding capacity, water quality, air quality, all of the ecosystem services that Vidisha was just talking about, we decided this is what we were going to do. I'm going to take just a minute, I think, to talk about our experience a little bit, and then I'll go into this this last week of advocacy work and why that is so important. So yeah, we're small scale. We're 3 acres. And because our focus has always been soil health, and because of our size, we've kind of done everything. So no-till exclusively for a while, low-till now, cover crops, animal integration, lots of compost, highly diversified with 50 to 60 different varieties. And because of all that focus, we've really been able to convert our really heavy compact clay into really mostly beautiful, dark, high organic matter soil. And that's been really good news for us in the face of climate change. It's built in a lot of resilience into our system. We're able to buffer droughts and heat a lot more than we would otherwise be able to. We use far less water than we would otherwise need to, which obviously we're facing another really extreme drought. And so that's all been really good, and it's allowed us to be really resilient. On the flip side of that, I'm staring out my window right now at like the large full-grown trees, like half bent over with the wind that just comes on every day around 10 o'clock and is brutal. We have really huge temperature swings, wildfires, and all the other things that everyone is worried about. And so that kind of brings me into this week of advocacy. We have benefited personally on our farm from USDA programs. We've done EQIP several times, both for irrigation, cost sharing, as well as greenhouses. We have 1 greenhouse already, and we just got approved for a second one. And we're fortunate in that, despite being really overworked and understaffed, our NRCS agent has always been able to help us with everything that we've needed, and we've had access to it. That is not necessarily true around our state. The San Luis Valley, which is the size of Connecticut, has 1 NRCS agent for the entire region. And so that kind of takes me out of my own personal bubble of what does or doesn't work for me and into more of the world of advocacy. And I would say that, I started off being a bit of a skeptic that showing up and sharing my on the ground experience and voice would really make a whole lot of a difference. But I've done that locally with our land use plan in our county and had great success. I've done that at the state level with several different bills over the years and had really great success. And through that process and through Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, I've really learned that showing up and sharing our stories and our real world experience really does make a difference and adds the nuance to the conversation that is sometimes missing, frankly, just because a lot of times people on the call aren't people who are on the ground working, understandably, because your job is to be doing this instead. And so this last week has been great. I feel like the conversations have been very dynamic across the board. There have been a lot of questions. The producers have been able to really articulate and bring forward the fact that that we are on the front lines of this, that we do feel it more acutely than the average citizen right now, because it is our everyday, and that we do really care and we're working really hard already, and that we need support. And so we need support in both technical assistance, we need support in programs, and we are ready and willing to be at the table to have those conversations on how to make sure that that nuance is really thought through in these programs as they move forward. And I could say more, but there are other people like Doug and Adam who have all sorts of important things to say. So thank you all very much for being here today. It's been a great week, and I think that it's made a lot of movement and will continue to going forward.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. Really appreciate those thoughts and that insight and the message that kind of showing up really does matter. Kind of very well put. Now I will turn it over to Doug, who I know is in California, but I'm mostly convinced will now announce that he's also from Wisconsin, and I will be truly outnumbered. So Doug, I'll turn it over to you kind of for a little bit about yourself and your thoughts on this week and NFU's climate work.
Oh, thanks, Jenny, and thanks, everyone. My credentials are rooted in Nebraska. I grew up on a farm there, and I have to say that I'm unexpectedly a fourth-generation farmer. I didn't ever expect that I would return to farming, but moving to California, Northern California, here in Mendocino County, 20 years ago, I found myself farming again. In my case, dry farming, much as we did back in Nebraska, hay and grain. In the last dozen years, the focus has been primarily the reintroduction of small grain production here in our county. All dry farmed, all on rented ground, all direct marketed. Firsthand experience of severe drought conditions for at least half of our harvest years. This year, April brought us a half inch of rain. We live with continuous fire danger. More than half the counties in the state are already a drought declaration area this year. Water in one of the valleys where we grow our grain was cut off for agricultural purposes already last month. I want to talk a little less, I think, about our practices, which are obviously focused on how we manage grain production in drought conditions, and talk a little bit more on my reflections of this experience with the Climate Advisory Panel. I'm probably one of the oldest members of the panel. I come to this perspective a little, as Hannah expressed, with some skepticism initially, and out of a deep concern for the immediacy of the climate crisis that we face. Everybody on the panel may be already tired of hearing me talk about the necessity for urgent action, and I have appreciated Hannah's reframing that as urgent action with a long-term view. That, I think, is part of the theme I've tried to bring to our meetings of this last week. And my impressions are that this is very much on the agenda. I have been impressed with the awareness on the part of the staff members with whom we've spoken. They're informed, they have questions, they're paying attention to this and to the need for action. I think that the era of climate change denial is hopefully behind us, and the period of acting on it with a sense of urgency, I hope, is here. I've been very impressed and humbled, honestly, by the knowledge of the members of this panel. I honestly at first thought I probably didn't have a place here, but I've come to appreciate the learning curve, at least for me, in terms of what I've gained from listening to the NFU staff, to the members of the panel, and to guest speakers. And I want to just emphasize, I think, what is probably apparent in the comments all of us are making, and that is the importance of continuing to have our voices heard, and that this avenue presented to us by NFU is a critical one in making those voices heard, and heard in an informed way. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I hope we'll continue to beat this drum with a sense of urgency and importance for the future.
Thanks for those thoughts, Doug, and as always, reminding us on the urgency factor. I think that's a really, really important note. Again, really appreciate your insight there. And now I'll turn it over to Adam Pimley from Montana Farmers Union for his relationship to Wisconsin and kind of thoughts, kind of his experience and thoughts on this week. Take it away, Adam.
Well, I guess I'll start with my Wisconsin connection, as that seems to be the most important issue of the day. I've got a ton of family there. We used to go there every summer for about a month, and I love Wisconsin. And I love Wisconsin more than I loved the drive between Montana and Wisconsin. That's for sure. Yeah, Montana farm boy here, born and raised on the farm, north central Montana, dry land. We grow wheat, barley, peas, lentils, and a few sheep now. And we do that all on an average of 12 inches of rainfall a year, which has been enough for a generation and a half of raising those crops. It's getting harder and harder, as Doug and Hannah alluded to. And I think one of my biggest takeaways from the last week, meeting with members of Congress and hearing stories from other panel members, is the similarity between a lot of the stories, no matter where the producers are from and what they're talking about. The patterns that we used to rely on to plan our crops and manage our risks are not patterns anymore. They're erratic, getting more erratic. The rainfalls that we used to count on, the spring rains, if they come, they come late, or they come way too heavy. At least that's for us, and the wind, and I mean the things that have been talked about. And all those things and the policies are easy to, I think, discuss and ponder and think about. What we need, what farmers need, what consumers need is Congress and the USDA and other agencies to get a move on, quite frankly. I know Congress has been thinking and talking and pontificating for quite a while. I really enjoyed the opportunity. We don't, Montana doesn't have a member on the Senate Ag Committee, although Montana Farmers Union has a great relationship with Senator Tester, and I'll be talking with his team in a couple of weeks. But the opportunity to talk to representatives from around the country, from other ag states who might have different crops, might have the same crops, but the issues are really all similar. That's, I think, my biggest takeaway. Producers need support because we do a pretty darn important job for our communities and our states and the country and the world. We grow food. That's about as basic as it gets. And it's getting harder and harder to do that. It's getting more costly. It's getting harder to manage the risk. So those are the things that we as producers need from our elected leaders, both in DC and in our home states. This opportunity provided by National Farmers Union was beneficial, not only for me, and I know the other producers, as we were, had an opportunity to learn, some of the behind the scenes policy workings and ideas and thoughts, and then have a little bit of a voice in shaping some of those comments that were sent to USDA. And we do that, at least I do that, with a pretty I don't want to say heavy heart, but I guess it is. I'm sitting here, my kids are over watching Snoopy as I talk here, you know, and I think about, you know, the farm and what it's going to look like when they might want to take it over. And I don't know, another 20, 30 years of talking about climate change and not doing anything, that's going to leave us in a pretty tough spot. However, if we take some action, they might have ground that's better than I found it. They might have ground that has, you know, rich carbon and organisms that feed the plants and you know, a healthy ecosystem. So I feel like right now we're at a point of a divergent path. We can go the way of science. Hold on, guys. Sorry, I'm interrupting Snoopy. We can go the way of science and listen to the folks who've been studying this, and listen to the folks who are on the ground and say something's wrong. We need some help, and here's the help that we need. I think Farmers Union has been very, very helpful in coalescing some of those ideas that folks on the ground think would be the most helpful. Yeah, we want to do the right thing. We just need a little bit of support. And I want to thank Farmers Union and Hannah and Doug. And I know they're not on here, but the members of staff that we spoke to, I was taken aback by, you know, some of the real deep engagement from some staffers that I maybe wouldn't have expected it from, including, you know, giving us some ideas to advocate for, including, you know, something that I don't know that I hadn't heard come up, such as direct hire authority at some of the federal agencies, so they don't have to go through all the loopholes and things to get hiring. So just even little things like that, we got some ideas and have really great discussions. And I think at least, you know, what we were told is, you know, in DC, they understand the urgency and they see it. And I think we can at least see some packages moving. That's, you know, better than it has been in the past. But the pace needs to pick up. I think Doug said it best. This is an urgent situation. It's been urgent for a while, but we're to the point now where we need to take some actions. We stand ready to help. I know there's farmers across the country that stand ready to help. I know Farmers Union is here to help you advocate. Get in touch with them if you want to get in touch with your member of Congress. You know, I think that's maybe one of the biggest things that we can do is advocate to Congress to tell them that this is something that farmers and ranchers, you know, expect to see action on. So thanks, Jenny.
Great, thanks, Adam. Really appreciate those thoughts. Did not plan the Wisconsin ties, but there you go. And a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and we want to continue having this conversation. Obviously, a big thank you to Badisha and USDA for providing the insight there, and also Hannah, Doug, and Adam for their thoughts, and all of the Climate Advisory Panel for their participation in meetings this week. I think Hannah, Doug, and Adam really kind of left us with a lot of food for thought, especially in light of Badisha's comments. I mean, I think it's clear that this is an urgent crisis, that farmers can help tackle it, but they need support. And so advocating matters, and showing up matters, and talking to our lawmakers really matter. And so with that, I will wrap it up. On behalf of myself, Patty, Mike, and the rest of the NFU team, of course, if you have any questions or have any interest or just want to talk about this, please reach out. You can find all of our information on our website. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.